Hi, this is Rose Lanham, president of Players for Good, and I'm going one-on-one with ADC Partners.
Hey, it's Dave Elmy of ADC Partners, and thanks for dropping in to check out this latest episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you're a returning listener, it's great to have you back. If it's your first time here, hope you enjoy the show. And if you enjoy it, please give us a follow or a review. So tell me, what's your greatest fear? Spiders? Maybe it's heights? The mushroom people monsters from that movie you watched on Channel 38's Creature Double Feature when you stayed up way too late? No, yeah, that one's mine. Well, for most people, speaking in public is their greatest fear. It's something Rose Lanham, the founder of Players for Good, a quickly growing speakers bureau for athletes, knows all too well. Because even players who are accustomed to competing in front of tens of thousands of people can get sweaty palms at the idea of speaking before a bunch of Rotarians. It's one of the reasons Rose launched Players for Good. The players she works with have amazing stories to tell about overcoming obstacles, surviving injury and illness, and experiencing what it takes to compete to win at the highest levels. Through Players for Good, she helps athletes craft their stories into compelling narratives and then finds opportunities for them to share those stories. In our conversation, we talk about how working with folks like Tony Gwynn showed her how athletes can impact a community, the qualities that make for a great speech, and what event producers should consider when featuring an athlete speaker at their events. All that and the lightning round too. So thanks for listening to my conversation with Rose Lanham, the founder of Players for Good. Hope you enjoy.
Honor, I'm always on the other side, like prepping them and giving, like, these are your questions, these are this.
That's true. You do sort of have that skill set here. You brief all. So finally, like we talked about, like you are on the other side of the equation now.
Exactly.
It's a little terrifying. I can only imagine. Let's just dive right in. I want to start by talking about your origin story. As you described to me earlier, you had some exposure to some pretty remarkable athletes that I think kind of set a tone for you. Some of the names you mentioned, like Lute Olson, you mentioned Pat Tillman, and Tony Gwynn, and these are, exceptional competitors, highly successful in their disciplines, but they were a lot more than that, and you really got to see some of that firsthand. So I wonder if you can recall some of those exposures, some of those moments, and how they kind of set your perspective for what was to come for you.
Growing up in Tucson, Arizona, I was exposed to Lute Olson's incredible Wildcat basketball program.
Yeah.
It was very influential in seeing players like Steve Kerr and Stoudemire. And not only were they bringing home the trophies, I think the impact on the community was so strong beyond the wins. The community knew he was raising men of character first, basketball players second.
Yeah.
He made sure they were positive role models throughout every effort, throughout every game. They were a class act.
Mm-hmm.
That carried over into college. I was fortunate enough to run at ASU and cross paths with Pat Tillman. We were there the same years, and seeing the impact that he has had across the nation, across the world with his service is incredible. And remembering him as a football player, but leaving professional sports to go serve his country.
Yeah.
And the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, I think people think about Pat Tillman in that capacity before they think about him as a football player. And he was a pretty remarkable football player in that regard, but it speaks to that idea of, yes, successful in their disciplines, but so much more.
They are so much more than the professional athlete. And he recognized the impact he could have, and then his family carrying on his legacy with races and scholarships across the country.
Yeah. And then Tony Gwynn is his own sort of remarkable story in its own right.
Yes, one of my earliest jobs was for the San Diego Padres.
Yeah.
We were fortunate to have incredible leadership at the top with President Larry Lucchino and Charles Steinberg leading community relations. And it was clear to every employee and every player that there was a strong commitment to giving back to the community, and the fans came first.
Yeah.
And San Diego loved Tony Gwynn.
Yeah, it's almost hard to define just how crazy that relationship between that city and that player was.
And today, you see at the
Yeah.
new ballpark, a huge mural dedicated to the late Tony Gwynn. But I got to see firsthand the impact he had when we'd take him into the fans, or just a handshake, a wave, and then certainly when he would do bigger programs to impact large groups, talk to a child one-on-one. Probably the sweetest ball player there could be, and he was larger than life in that city. But I
Yeah.
saw at a young age the power that this athlete had to bring good to the world.
So you had this sort of broad general perspective of it, like seeing what those people could do just with their personas and when they would engage with people. And I know you went through this period of time where you're putting on corporate events for Yahoo. And that led to a opportunity with Danny Warfel and his foundation. Danny Warfel, of course, a UF grad, a Heisman Trophy winner. Um, how did that transition take place? How did it go from Yahoo and putting on these major corporate events to like helping out with Danny Warfel's foundation? It seems like a big switch, but maybe it's more organic than that. How did that take place?
Yes, there were a few years in between where I worked in philanthropy in the Bay Area. And again, seeing how when you gather a group of people committed to positive change,
Yeah,
we saw that in the Bay Area with Stanford Children's Hospital. When you bring a group together, how much an impact you can have on a community.
yeah.
So I spent about 10 years working with different philanthropic boards, and while I was raising our children, and the opportunity came, dear friends who are UF alums asked for help starting Danny's foundation.
Just out of the blue, just kind of like, hey, you've got some experience doing this kind of thing. How can you help out?
The transition to sports philanthropy was a natural transition, bringing passion and professional background of sports, of events, of philanthropy together in one. And with Danny, we sat down, spent a lot of time, several months, defining what his legacy will be, what his passions are, what he stands for. And
So
of course,
you really were able to help him, like he knew he wanted to do something, but you really helped clarify it for him.
me and others, yes.
Yeah,
I don't want to take full credit that, but
it was all
we,
you. It's fine.
it's all
Rose.
me.
You can...
We spent a lot of time, I think, reflecting, and he's so smart
Yeah.
and so committed to using his platform to inspire others. So it's very important to get clarity of who he is, what he
Yeah.
stands for beyond the football player. And that's really what's important to him.
And it was a difficult process to drill down into something that he felt was, the word that came to my mind was actionable, which is maybe the wrong word here, but like providing that definition and helping define it. Was it a challenging process, and was he fully integrated into it, or did it really come out naturally just through conversations as you worked with him?
Yeah, Danny is fully integrated
Yeah.
into inspiring service
Yeah.
in multiple ways and every touch point he can. And the biggest program he has is the Warfel Foundation Warfel Trophy, honors college football servant leaders. And it's
Oh,
a wonderful program to celebrate the service and the impact these players are having at their school and in the local communities.
when you think about that original interaction with Danny Warhol and some of the work that you were doing along with that, can you talk about the moment when the idea for Players for Good started to germinate in your mind?
Players for Good is a speakers bureau for professional athletes who are committed to bettering the community around them.
Hmm.
They are professional speakers who happen to be wonderful, wonderful humans who excelled in sports. When I was working at the Warfel Foundation, kept crossing paths with like-minded athletes like Danny, who are just incredible giving back to others. And he gets asked to speak a lot. And I would call other athletes, would you like this gig? Or we have this opportunity. And I really enjoyed matching the speakers with the events. And that goes back to 20 years ago, picking keynotes and finding the right fit and briefing the speakers.
Right. Some of the big events you were doing on a corporate scale, trying to figure out who that was going to be. So that kind of was fairly seamless for you, I imagine. You sort of saw where that opportunity lied.
Yes, it was very comfortable instead of reaching out to corporate leaders and finding the right fit. It's really enjoyable to hear what an event is looking for, what type of speaker, what tone,
Yeah.
and help a wonderful athlete speaker to find that opportunity.
And so there's obviously a ton of places where people can go and find athlete speakers, right? There's a lot of speakers bureaus and some that feature, athletes as well. What's the distinction that you were trying to create here with Players for Good? How did you want to try to make it different?
With Players for Good, I'm creating a boutique experience for both
Mm,
the athlete speakers, and the corporate booking contacts.
yeah,
You work with the Speakers Bureau, often they may have access to thousands of people. I'm really keeping Players for Good small. They're all people I've worked with before or know about their foundations, their commitment. So if someone is asking, I really want a speaker who can address cancer in a real way. Merrill Hodge, has
right.
been through it and can dive deep, or I know his tone. I enjoy kind of the matchmaking of hearing what the client is looking for, and they
Yeah.
may come with one idea, and when you hear what the tone or who their audience is, say, oh, you actually really, perhaps a Chicago Bear, your event is in Chicago, we have,
Sort of the natural connection points.
or you want someone to speak about finance. Well, we have 3 MBAs who have finance degrees, and they happen to be NFL players, but they really are well versed in this industry.
But there is this unique intersection that you've arrived at in identifying athletes and their philanthropic endeavors, right? And
Yeah.
it can be a really powerful combination. And I'm wondering if you have insights onto when that works best. Like which athletes have done that you consider have really figured out like how to use their persona and to advance a philanthropic agenda that they have.
Yes, I think a lot of athletes, when they're starting, perhaps they don't have just money to give away, but if they recognize the power they have in mentoring
Mm,
and just speaking, interacting with youth, whatever their causes, typically a athlete's foundation is based on a very personal event or a person in their life
right.
that had a life-changing, life-altering event,
Yeah, something that impacted them.
impacted them, impacted their family in a major way, and they want to use that experience to help others.
Is it difficult sometimes? I mean, sometimes you hit this image of athletes, right? And they're supposed to be these, sort of the traditional stoic people who are playing these sports, right? And they're supposed to be tough and all that kind of stuff. Is it sometimes hard to get them to crack open these foundational moments to really own them, for lack of a better term? What's that process like?
I've been really fortunate that people I'm working with have all been very humble,
Yeah,
very authentic, and I think that's what we seek.
yeah,
They're very clear on who they are and the journey they've had, for
yeah.
better or worse. And a great example of someone using his platform for good, and it could have gone a different way, is quarterback Quincy Carter,
Mm,
who led the Dallas Cowboys to the 2003 playoffs. He has returned to his hometown of Decatur, Georgia, for 20 years, and he is so committed to giving back to the local community, the school, the community that helped him go on to
right.
greatness. They raised him. He is committed to giving free football clinics. He brings in other NFL players. And at every event, every opportunity, he is sharing his journey and his struggle with addiction when he was in the
Mm,
NFL, with hopes that others will find inspiration,
yeah.
go a different path, and to learn from his mistakes. It takes a lot of humility to say, hey, I had it all. I was quarterback of America's team, and don't let this happen to you.
I mean, so that example, that idea of athletes really digging into their own personal stories, I'm assuming that's a underlying theme for success in a lot of this. I mean, how have you seen audiences really moved by a speaker and their stories? I mean, are there examples that you look back on and go like, wow, that was a phenomenal event and that person did a great job of this that produced that experience?
As speakers on stage, and you can tell the audience is captivated. What's really powerful, and Mark Pattison, a former Raider and Saints player who has climbed the 7 summits,
Mm,
has, I don't want them to leave talking about me. But when you overhear the message between the audience members and how it relates to them, how it relates to their life. Because most people in the audience, they're not going to play in the NFL. They're not
right.
going to home run at Wrigley, and they're not going to climb the 7 summits. But there are lessons to be learned that leave people transformed and inspired. Each of these athletes has reached the 1% and 1% and 1%,
Right.
but they're able to translate the experiences, the lessons learned to all of us.
To really find that piece of connectivity. It goes back to the idea that we spoke to about previously, which is, the more personal, the more they can own these experiences and share them with folks that create those inspirational moments is really where success comes from. I'm wondering what other common threads you see in the really effective speakers and presenters, whether they're athletes or not, because I think probably there may not be a ton of athletes listening to this podcast, but everybody listening certainly has those moments where they need to be in front of people and trying to be compelling. So what are some of the things that you've seen are particularly effective?
For sure. They are smart,
Mm,
humble, and
hmm.
authentic. I think very clear sense of self, and they own their journey. Also, most of our speakers have professional media experience, have been on
Right.
national outlets.
They come with a little bit of game already in place.
They are very comfortable on stage with the microphone, and they enjoy connecting.
Mm,
All of our events have a prep call with the host and the athlete. And people might think, I don't want to get on the phone, or why would I don't want to take up their time. 15 minutes of briefing a speaker about what's happening in your organization, or what your CEO's favorite team is.
yeah.
All the information that you can provide up front to a speaker can help them connect with the audience. And that's really what we're going for, a unique experience. Well, each of them have their themes with their speeches. They want to customize. They want to know, oh, there were layoffs last quarter, or there's a new CFO. And whatever you can provide to a speaker to brief them is going to make it a more memorable conference.
It's funny you bring that up, right? They do have media channel, the media experience. They are used to playing in front of sometimes tens and thousands of people at any given time. But I'm wondering if public speaking presents its own unique challenge for some people. It's a different environment. Is there prep work? Is there training that you do with a lot of these people to make sure that they're in a position to succeed?
It's unique to every individual.
Yeah.
It's not like every baseball player is going to enjoy getting on stage. There's going to be
Yeah.
1 in 30, or every soccer player. Great example, Heather Mitts, a 3-time gold Olympian. I mean, how unique is she? 12 years she was at Olympic caliber.
Yeah.
And she reached out and said, I love speaking. I enjoy sharing what the gold medal mindset is. It's enjoyable and fuels her. There's going to be other people who you might pay them a lot of money. They just don't want to go on stage.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I'll sign some autographs. So it's really finding players, speakers who find that fuels them, probably like any executive or business speaker.
Have you ever had to work with somebody and say, maybe this just isn't for you? And like, is that a difficult conversation to have?
Fortunately, I have not,
Yeah.
because the people I'm working with, a small group of media trained people who are already attracted to speaking. They're coming to us because they want to speak. I would say some, and it's clear on all sides, they prefer, and I see it, they would rather be panelists or
Yeah.
a
Okay.
fireside chat than deliver a keynote. And that's important when you're booking a speaker, is to know where are their strengths. And I think these larger speakers bureaus don't always know that. But I do ask them the first time we sit down to meet about, where are your passions? What do you enjoy doing? What format works best for your
Yeah. Where are
story?
you going to be most comfortable?
your message, and we'll seek that out. If you don't want to speak to 10,000 people, we'll look for 500 or 50 person organizations and events. There's opportunities. It could be online endorsements. It could be a 10,000 person conference. Also asking, do you like to travel?
Yeah.
Or we have a lot of athletes in Chicago and in Atlanta who can do local events, in Orlando, who don't need to leave. They will travel, but when you can hire a local speaker, either with ties to that city or saves you on airfare and hotel, that's really smart for the event planner.
It creates a level of efficiency too. So there's been a bit of advice for organizations that are thinking about booking an athlete as a speaker. What else should they be thinking about to make sure that they're putting both the event and an athlete speaker in a position to succeed? Like, how do you work with organizations to make sure that they've got it figured out?
Preparation, like anything,
Yeah.
preparation is key. And when you're putting on a large conference, you probably have multiple speakers, you have a lot of stakeholders, but providing a briefing, always print out a one sheet paper, although we're all on phones, but providing your speaker, no matter who it is, a one sheet about your organization, the boilerplate, who the key execs are, and also setting expectations before the event. If you want 10 footballs autographed, please,
You
you
let us know beforehand.
yes.
Yeah.
And, or if there's someone you need a meet and greet with your speaker that they know where to go. Also assigning them someone to really handhold and escort. Even the most efficient professional speaker will appreciate having one person assigned to them.
Yeah.
Just get them from point A to B and help them get to the car when it's time to go.
Yeah,
Be-
it's the little things, isn't it? It's the details associated with an event that a lot of people think about. Oh, it's up here at the major, like, oh my gosh, where am I going to find a facility to? Just making sure people know where to go and have that as mapped out as clearly as possible. It really is down to the details, isn't it?
It is. And when I would produce events, this might sound silly, but I would think of you're writing instructions for a 5-year-old. I mean, you have to just sales conferences.
We podcast hosts really enjoy that kind of mentality as well. I'm like a 5-year-old.
When you have a speaker or executive coming on stage, just giving them bulleted details of when is rehearsal? What type of microphone will they have? When, exactly how many minutes do they have on stage? Have a countdown clock.
Yeah.
Speakers don't want to go over, they don't want to violate that. But if you don't have a clock, they might not know.
Yeah, I don't have an internal clock running in my head at any given time. And gosh knows when I get a microphone in front of me, it's off to the races. You got to put some clear guidelines around me.
Yes,
Rose.
and if you're having Q&A, manage that.
Yeah.
Help them. Maybe prepare the questions for those speakers ahead of time. There's a lot of little details, and I'm always happy to work with, if it's a younger planner, work with, here's some things we can provide the speaker to make it a smooth event. That's really important to me at the end of the day. I've told some, it's not about the money or more bookings. It's we need to produce magical events for the attendees and the speakers so that it's a win-win for all.
Rose Lanham, she is the president of Players for Good. Thanks so much for spending the time today, Rose. Before I let you go, though, I got to put you into the lightning round. I realize this is something that you weren't expecting. I just want to make sure that you are as prepared as you can be for the lightning round. That is not laugh, did not say confidence. Okay, so here we go. The lightning round, Rose Lanham. Generally understood that public speaking is people's number one fear. What is yours?
Public speaking.
Okay. Come from the right. I mean, who knows it better than you would? Okay, understood. So you fall in that number one fear category. You currently live in Atlanta, where it can be quite hot. I think it's probably getting pretty hot there right now. What is your best Southern expression for describing how hot it is?
I live in hot Atlanta.
It's hot Atlanta. It's just as simple as that. All right, you are. What other flower would you like to be named after?
Daisy. I had a grandma Daisy.
Oh, well, that was pretty interesting. This is
Magnolia.
another. That was easy. Another heat-related question. You ran both track and field and cross country for Arizona State, a state not known for its coolness. So I'm wondering if you maybe had considered a university in a cooler climate might have been to your advantage.
Definitely, but I sure like the I think it was 6:30 a.m. practices and 7 on Sundays.
You are the only college person I know who ever said they enjoyed the 6:30 a.m. practice. So kudos to you. Rose Lanham, she's the president of Players for Good. Thanks for spending the time, Rose.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at abcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.